Hi, I'm Peter Centoscano, host of Citizens Climate Radio. We highlight people's stories, we celebrate your successes, and together we share strategies for talking about climate change. We do all this by hearing from some pretty surprising climate advocates. We feature politicians, preachers, and poets. Citizens Climate Radio is designed to inform you about the many ways people are addressing the causes and impacts of climate change. Subscribe and listen to Citizens Climate Radio wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Climify, the podcast that connects climate scientists and design educators together so that we can help combat our climate crisis in our classrooms. The discussions on this program are geared to help you climify your syllabi to assign projects that not only teach design fundamentals, but also can have a positive impact on our climate.
This episode is brought to you by Renourish. Renourish is your one-stop online resource for sustainable design and systems thinking strategies and tools for the graphic designer. You can learn more about Renourish on their website at renourish.org, or you can follow them on Twitter and Facebook at Renourish.
I am Gabrielle Merite. I'm an information designer and data illustrator, and I help ethically driven and creative organization and cover important truths and ensure stories of attention through data. And you can find me on my website at gabriellemerite.com or on my Instagram at gabmd.
That was Gabrielle Merite, a data visualization designer and environmental scientist. The perfect kind of guest for Climify. I was introduced to her by one of the Climate Designers co-founders, Mark O'Brien. And after taking a look at her work and talking with her, we decided that we would get together and record this particular episode. In this episode, you'll hear Gabrielle talk about her work and the importance for climate action through telling the story of data. You heard this before in season 1 with Gerardo Solis's episode. But what's different about this one is that Gabrielle goes into the details of how to do it. What helps tell the story of data best so that we can inspire and encourage climate action. So I hope you enjoy my interview with Gabrielle Merite. Welcome, Gabrielle, to the program. Season 2 of Climify. I'm glad to have you here. And I have a lot of questions for you. So I do hope you're ready for all of these.
Nice.
Okay. I'm really interested in the work that you're doing. And I wanted to start there. I wanted to ask you a few questions about why are you working with data? Why are you working in the area of climate? Can you tell us more about how you got there and why you're doing that work?
Yes. Originally, my background was in science, in immunology, everything virus and bacteria and vaccines.
Oh, then you're a much needed person right now.
Yeah, you would have think so. I decided to feel a while back. And from there, I've worked in scientific communication. So scientific communication is about writing, almost translating scientific papers, research paper to the normal public. So for news media or, press release towards the journalist. And when you work with words in scientific concept, you often realize that it would take you longer to write all those paragraphs to explain a concept than if you were just designing it in like a quick diagram. So I started looking at what are the way to explain, conceptual molecular biology, for instance, but also starting with data about epidemiology, for instance. So how do we do nice graphs that journalists can understand quickly or, general audience can, quickly understand and appreciate. And so that's kind of how I fall into data slowly but surely. It's called information design as a whole, because really it's not so much about the data only, but also anything that's just purely informational and sometimes qualitative more than quantitative.
I mean, you still need words, right? When you're looking
You do,
yeah.
Yeah, a concept, in climate change, a lot of concept. It's not just
Right.
data part. It's also just primary concept. How does, carbon lives in the air and all that stuff. Why climate? I guess this is kind of a hard question.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's self-explanatory, but maybe not, right?
I know. I think I was always interested in science, and that's definitely part of the science field. But also, I was raised in the countryside, and so I had this appetite for, you know, trees, and we always have animals. And I became vegetarian quite early on because when you see the animals you're about to eat and you grow up with them, you have this different approach. So I think there was this education around respect of nature and connection to nature. And also, when it comes to data, there's not. I mean, there's plenty of data, but I was
Mm.
interested in data that connects to human beings. And really, when it comes to climate, it's really just the emergency of the century. So it's like it's everywhere. You cannot talk about
Right.
anything without talking about climate. So I think that's how it worked out. So it was a lot of my
Yeah.
work involved climate science.
And even viruses, going back to your
Hmm.
beginning, uh, there's a lot of research about how deforestation can release viruses that we don't even know about into into our lives, right? And
Yeah, no,
so,
definitely. More and more, we're gonna have zoonotic disease. So diseases that
is that something
relate
you
to
worked on
animals.
too? Did you research that as
I
well?
didn't work on that. When I was doing a bit of research, I was working on cancer and
Oh yeah.
immune defect, people that don't have all the immune system. That was a one when I was really junior at the time
Mhm.
in the lab, but not too bad. But I mean, it's such a fascinating topic. I think when you like science, you never stop looking at it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, um, this is one reason why I had you on is just this mix of design and science. And so I'm wondering, I think your work matters a lot, but I'm wondering how you tell other people, maybe the clients you work with or the people you work with, why does your work matter?
Does my work matter? Sometimes I wonder. I think our work, I really see ourselves, and I'm going to say we because it's not just me who does information design, but as
Sure.
translator of information. So we really help convey ideas and concept in all those data to anybody in a way that's visual. And it's important because I think it's really important for us to understand the world we live in and what we need to do
Mm,
to, in the context of climate, what we need to do to preserve that world. There's something about taking informed decisions. Like right now, we need to understand completely the impact of our action at the individual scale, but specifically for the people who are taking decision. Those people are not doing the research. It's two different groups of people. So
mm,
my role is to really help connect those two groups, the people who are studying climate and studying all the consequences of climate change, and helping people, whether it's a general audience or policymakers, to understand how do we translate this science into like effective solution. Um, effective solution to do something and address the problem. And and in terms of like general audience, I think my work is not so much about, helping them take decision because it's not much you can do at the individual level that actually is impactful for climate. But there's something about the topics that get the most attention, get the most funding. So
mm.
the more we alert the people about the specific thing they should actually fight for, the more likely it's going to be funded and the higher impact it's going to have.
Yeah, that makes sense. Have you been finding or have any good success stories from all this work you've been doing?
I don't know. It's such a funny question because I get the like, how do you measure impact? And we don't know. Like, I think
Yeah.
we first the impact of a work, even as anybody, climate science and all this strategy, it's gonna take years probably. What I'm seeing is I think there's what's great. I listen to the field of data is the more there is, definitely the more people are aware and are interested in data, and I think that's really important that it fully understand the complexity of it. Um, do we have success? I don't know. There's enthusiasm around it. Like that's the big
Yeah.
question, right? Does it work?
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I'm hoping it does. There's a great article if I've ever seen it in the Guardian about the 10 slide that changed the prime minister opinion on
Oh,
climate
I
change.
did see that.
Yeah, and it's ugly slides, by the way. Like
They're
if
really
you
ugly. Yeah.
they are horrifying. And I'm gonna bet that actually it's not the slide that changed in mind because they were really bad design. So we voted for
Yeah, they
something different.
were.
I mean, they were directly screenshot from scientific papers, which is why it's a problem when but I'm gonna bet that the storytelling on top is what made what he suddenly had a like bulb moment of like eureka out, like, oh now I understand why we have a problem.
So it wasn't just the data, it was some sort of message that came through to him. Do you remember what that message was? Because I don't.
I mean, I think he had this idea that is really common that like he didn't fully understand that humanity right now is driving the global warming. There has been in history across millions of years this peak of heat across, but like right now we are like speed 100 compared to any of the
Mhm.
speed. This is what we can adapt, and we see this crash of the
Yeah.
ecosystems, and that's fully driven by human activity. And I think he hadn't fully understood that.
Hmm.
And I think it takes, and a lot of people have that sense of, okay, it's happening. I think now most people agree that it's happening, but not everybody agrees that it's human activity related. Still, a lot of people believe that it's just happening because it's a natural cycle.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Are you finding, or what are your thoughts about just the idea of data changing people's minds on climate? Do you think that works, or are there other things needed to really push them over?
I think, I guess the easy answer is no. I don't
No.
think data visualization by itself is changing people's mind. Uh, I think we can. There's two groups that you need when we think about social change theory in general. You need to think about several groups. There's the people that are already like activists and like convinced and almost darling database because they already know what to do. They're pretty informed. They're gonna look for the research and data by themselves. There are the people that are like fully what we call resistors. So those people you
Right.
cannot convince because they're already on the other side, like opinion side, and you're not convincing them with science because it's an emotional reaction that they have. And
Hmm.
then you have the fence sitters. And the fence sitters are people that are like living at the boundaries of those of like, I'm not sure what to think about this subject. So we don't change people's mind. We help them lean to one side or another. That's one way to see it. There's
Yeah.
that. But also I think overall, we know that bringing facts to people is actually, we think fact convince people, whereas actually it's the emotion they have in relationship to the fact that help them change their minds. So
Oh, I see.
it's they have a fundamentally personal relationship to data and science. So we have to integrate data visualization as part of the story around climate and included it with other skills like writing, photography, reporting, individual stories about people affected. And that's the way you actually get people to start reflecting and maybe changing, their position around specific topics. But just throwing facts at people, and we've seen that during COVID, is not efficient. It just
No.
doesn't. It actually has an opposite reaction. And this is why there's a push almost against raising awareness without driving action.
So you need both. Obviously, you need both. And storytelling, from what I heard you say, the data has to be wrapped in a story.
I think so. I think so. This is
Yeah.
what I'm working with.
That's what
So,
you're doing. So,
but yeah, I think we need to, and I think it's well done nowadays. And it's a really an integral part of like how do we tell the stories, and we have to put this information in. But as itself, it just simply doesn't work because there's even science around that. There's research papers about how people have approached the charts, not about like how good it looks. I mean, it helps. Don't get me wrong.
sure. Yeah, we'd like to think
But
that as designers, right?
it does help. There's
Yeah.
definitely a bit, but there's, for instance, there's a research paper by Evan Beck, and he went into rural America and he showed he showed those people in rural America different graphs from different type of sources, right? He saw
Yeah.
them blindly, like without knowing the source, and then he also did some where he showed the source, like where did the database came from. And obviously the source affect how people see it. So if it's from the New York Times and you're on the extreme right of the political spectrum, you just reject it altogether. Like it's not happening. It's even though it's a good database, it
Mm.
looks great. It's like they're gonna, fully discard the database and say it's a bad data. Like they're gonna rank it lower. And a second fact that's really interesting to me personally is people will get caught up on thing that he asked them what's the best, pretty much which one do you like the best and which one do you find the most informative, etc. And what's really interesting is that people would get caught up on like personal fact that they can find in the data. So for instance, if the theme is about alcoholism and they have an uncle that may have been affected by alcoholism, they think
Ah,
this chart is the best. And some people would see the same chart, but the title would be different. For instance, if it's South Carolina has been affected by extreme weather, they think this chart is better than the chart that says the US has been affected by extreme weather. And then there's like all the point and South Carolina is in there. So they have a complete personal attachment of like, does that concern me? Is it about me? If it's about me or something I know or someone I know, then I'm interested and I think it's a good graph. But if
Yeah.
I think the source is not what I like, then I don't care about what it says.
Now I wonder too, with that, not only that, would context or context of the visuals help? So culturally, if you presented some data that you designed to that same audience, but it was visually related to cultural phenomenon there, do you think that would even help it connect better with them?
I think so. I mean, I'm having a complete assumption. It's not measured. We have very little literature and
Oh,
research on
okay.
how people interact with. We know things like things like misinterpretation of graphic and things like that, but we have very little interpretation on like because beautiful is such a hard concept, and what's
Yeah.
culturally similar is undefined. So it's actually it's like the merging of measuring visual impact and like social, almost like society research. Anyhow, it's I don't think we have measurement on that. But my assumption personally, the way people approach it in general is that it needs to concern them. And there's also something about I think the idea of making a discovery yourself.
Mhm.
And that is research on. It's called tripping over the truth.
Tripping
And
over the truth.
yeah, tripping over the truth. It's a concept that and I can't remember the research, but it was a nonprofit that was trying to convince people, I believe in like Central Africa to use the bathrooms,
Mhm.
but they were used to they had brand new bathroom that had been built for them, but it had they hadn't explained them how to use it. They were like, you have to use this now. You don't have to go outside anymore. But they like didn't even care much, and they use it for like the water because it's good water, right? Other
Yeah.
problem of like what we provide. But what was interesting is that instead of telling them you need to use this bathroom because it didn't work, they were like, what if we try to make them realize that what they're doing, which is, paying and all this stuff in their own field next to the agriculture and where they have food is a problem. So they would take those people where they go because it's kind of like a common area where they all, go do their own little business. And they're like, I think the social researcher went and like took water from like the soil, they put a little soil in water and were like, can you drink this water? And the person from the village were like, well, no, because it's gross, right? And
Yeah.
he was, and like and he made them realize through emotions, which is kind of shame. And also he just made them realize that they can use the spectrum and there's a reason why they should, because then they can actually use those fields and it won't be contaminated anymore. So there's this thing about people realizing on their own. And I think it goes through like a personal interaction with the data and also this idea of not lecturing them, but just
Yeah.
bringing information in like a very neutral way.
Yeah, I think that emotional part is super important. I heard it in the first season of this podcast with a couple of people who were actually in Louisiana, New Orleans, and somewhere else in Louisiana. But they both experienced these catastrophic storms that they had not experienced before. And afterwards, they thought, wow, that was worse because of our actions that led to the warming of our planet,
Mhm.
right? So I could definitely see emotions impacting um, people who are on the fence. Do you find that the people you're talking about that might be swayed or on the fence, that's that demographic you mentioned?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think anybody can become a fence sitter. I think if you really set in your way and you decided that you don't care, it's a bit different. But that's not the majority of people. The
Sure.
majority of people is just floating around and being like, I don't know. And it's really hard. The narratives around climate change are really focused on Westerners and also like white people. And but like white people is a big category, for instance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes we were like, we should all make progress and like cut or, get an electric car. But like, not everybody can afford an electric car.
Hmm.
What if you need to drive to work? You can't bike everywhere. Some people can. Some people can. And I think we have those like narratives that I focus on certain Californian population that may be a bit, that bit wealthier than some others.
Yeah.
Also
Exactly.
look at it in California, but because of that, it affects the story differently. And we can have a rejection of like, well, you know, I don't want to hear about those stories because they keep blaming me for this, but there's nothing I can do about it. So, they just
Hmm.
reject the whole story and data altogether, where this is why we have to have local stories. and focusing, for instance, for them, or like Louisiana, explaining them that you have catastrophic climate disasters because of climate change, because of the human action, instead of talking to them about the big trucks they're driving.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing so far, if I'm deconstructing everything you've said so far, it's data visualization wrapped in a story and local.
Yes.
That's the most effective. And so I
Make it
wonder,
personal.
make it very personal. So with
Make
that
it personal.
personal part, I took a class, I think right before the pandemic, about social influencing,
Mm.
and they gave examples of different cultures. And so I'm wondering too, is it not just the source of the information, like where the data came from, but also the person who delivers it? So in the case of maybe some communities, the local pastor is an important person. Depending on the culture, it might be a chieftain, right? What are your thoughts about like the person who's showing the data? How much
No,
does that matter?
absolutely. I think it matters more
A
than
lot.
anything almost. I think of it often about just my relationship with my own close friends and family.
Hmm.
Um, like my grandparents, they're 80 years old. They live in France. They have this relationship with the idea of being eco-friendly that's very difficult because they obviously, being older and having been born in another century, pretty much,
Yeah.
they they have this, they leaning on the right side of politics and influenced by what they're seeing there because they belong to. But at the same time, they also have very empathetic to people in general, and they have a big attachment to countryside and nature because they were raised there. And for instance, my grandmother keep talking about eco terrorism because
Ecoterrorism.
yeah, so people breaking things because of ecology, which I think is hilarious. But for her, it's like a subject. She's seen it in the news, at TV, and her relationship with TV is, she believes it. And but at the same time, she's worried for the bees. She loves the bees.
Oh, good.
And the bees are disappearing. She read something somewhere that the bees are disappearing. So she's really sad. And because of that, she started looking at why are the bees disappearing? And that leads to an open conversation. And suddenly I could talk to her about how, it's related to the fact
Uh,
that there's less flowers and there's less trees and they have less space in cities in general to like actually eat and live. And she was like, oh, that's so sad. So what can I do? And then suddenly you have, a grandmother who used to be completely resistant to anything related to ecology, looking forward to like do something. So it's really about that. And it comes from me, obviously, but even before I couldn't talk about it because my approach was wrong, starting the lecture. So yes, I think people like
yeah,
sometimes like you can approach them and you can only know how to approach them when you are part of this community.
true. Yeah, it's finding that common ground with people you trust that trust you, and then being able to tell the story in an emotional, impactful way.
Yeah.
We solved it. Like, what do now? I mean, we should be able to fix everything.
I mean, it's funny because you would meet people that are in the field and cannot talk to their own family about what they believe in when it comes to climate,
Hmm.
And that's because maybe they're approaching it wrong. They're trying to like lecture. I mean, I really think that we are also very much lecturing the individual and not having the
Yeah,
empathy around the situation. So I don't lecture my parents about eating meat because they've been raised this way. They literally don't know what else to do. But
yeah.
I'm like making my own, potentially bringing vegan food at, family dinners and let them taste it and see if they like it, and then slowly just, if they want to ask questions, I'll talk to them about it. But I won't, shove the data down the road.
No, that's a good strategy because I'm not vegan, but I'm vegetarian, and I have brought vegetarian food to family events, to events with friends who I guess were a little bit like skeptical. I mean, this was years ago. There's less skepticism, I think, nowadays than there was like 10 years
Not
ago.
if you come from France. Same
Not, no, it's
skepticism.
cultural then. It's cultural then.
It's very cultural.
Okay, so France is definitely a very meat-based
Mhm.
meat-based culture. A lot of Western Europe, and yeah, it's just a matter of like them trying it, and it gets them over that like fear. Is it fear that like why are they against it?
Um, Yes, I think there's something about also it's an identity crisis of my identity is doing something wrong.
I
There's a
see.
bit of like I mean I assume there's some research on it, but there's a bit of like this shift. This example of it is a very good example of like why we cannot convince people to stop, even though it's good for your health, it's good for a lot of reasons. At least cut off pork, for instance, so like the red meat, which is the worst for climate and the worst for your health.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's like this again, this judgment that comes with it, and it's actually a crisis of identity. In France,
Hmm.
not eating meat is like makes you not French. Like I'm also vegetarian. I still eat cheese from time to time and egg, but it's a problem, like quite literally for people. Like what do you mean you don't eat the national dish? You know?
Yeah, it's very like sort of national pride, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have those dishes that I think worldwide famous, and it's raw meat. You know, so it's hard to really, yeah, you like rejecting your own identity when you when
Mhm.
you when you move away from that.
I'm sure that's the same case in Texas, for instance. I mean, I lived in Texas. I lived in 3 different cities in Texas, one of which was Austin. I did not experience the skepticism to vegan and vegetarian there, but I mean, Dallas, Fort Worth, when I lived there, it was steakhouse after steakhouse, and that's where we went. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
I mean
actually,
that's what's available. There's also
yeah,
a
that's
question
what's
of
there.
that.
That's
Yeah,
what's there.
yeah.
And actually that was the city, in fact, where I decided I should become a vegetarian was when I was in Dallas,
Huh.
Dallas, Texas. It was just it was a health thing at first.
For
Red
a lot
meat.
of people, I think, and
Yeah.
this is why you can approach it different ways. You don't have to talk about climate whatsoever. So, like my grandmother, I don't even say the words climate to her because she would get triggered. So I talk about the bees and
Bees.
the
Yeah, that
bees
works. I
were.
mean, that's something that I read um that the US Army was doing. They would talk about sea level rise. They wouldn't talk about climate change, but that's how they got a lot of Republican senators to agree to some specific components of funding that they wanted was to deal with sea level rise.
Yeah, it's so and this is why I think data viz is so related to other skills. And like people think it's just the idea of visualizing data and the graphic itself, but it's about the legend, it's about the word we use and what
Right.
have meaning for different people and emotion related. I was just looking at studies from I think Yale's University about the relationship to methane. And
Hmm.
when you talk about methane, people think greenhouse gases and pollution, but if you talk about natural gas, which is 90% methane, people
Yeah.
are like, this is good because they've been trying to think natural gas is a good thing. It's called natural gas, you
Right.
know?
That's a branding thing, I'm sure,
It's a
right?
burning thing. So let's reverse it and let's use that. They've used those terms to tweak the truth. But can we reverse that psychology and maybe avoid certain words in our visuals and in our design to actually go around those like emotional feeling attached to specific words and choices of formulation.
Well, we're going to get into the rebranding of climate change and sustainability in the next part of the show. But first, I'm going to pause just for a minute to take some break to play some of these commercials that we have. We'll be right back.
Where do young designers see themselves at the intersection of climate change and innovation? And how can we teach that intersection in the classroom? Designers are problem solvers, capable of imagining solutions for a more sustainable future. We have a bigger role to play in all phases of the design process, not just the beginning. My name is Rachel Cifarelli, graphic designer, recent college grad, and part of the Climate Designers EDU team. And after graduating, I realized today's classrooms tend to skip over that universal side of design. So if you're a design educator, I want to hear from your students. Help set in motion the first ever project that centers students at the intersection of design education and climate change. I want to know what your students think about sustainable design, how they see climate change impacting their future careers, and what even comes to mind when they hear the term climate design. Send your students to climatedesigners.org/edu/New Survey to take the 5-question survey or sign up for an interview with me. Help me inform a new wave of design education, one that teaches every designer how to be a climate designer.
Do you want to help design a better world? Start by subscribing to Evolve CPG. a podcast featuring the purpose-driven entrepreneurs, executives, and consultants behind the most impact-driven brands in the world. You'll learn how innovative leaders are leaning into their purpose, how better for the world brands are scaling positive impact, and how the product industry is solving some of the world's biggest problems. Be part of the evolution. Find Evolve CPG wherever you get your podcasts and visit evolvecpg.com to learn more.
Okay, we're back. Gabrielle, you just touched upon something prior to the break here about branding, how specifically, I guess, with the word climate change. And that's it's a question that for me came from conversations in the first season of this podcast, from our guests and from some of the listeners as well. And I want to ask you that question. First of all, how do we rebrand climate change and sustainability? Do you think that's possible? Do you think that's needed?
It depends how we define rebranding, I guess.
That's true. That's true. How would you think about that term? You are a designer, so that's something that you're familiar with. So if that's the context you want to look at it, or is it more of the science side of things?
No, it's an interesting term because I think when we think brand, we think, at least to me as a designer, I feel visual designing. So, when you think climate change stability, green, natural things that feels very LA in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's a good, why do we have this aesthetic? Do we need this aesthetic? Again, it comes down to what you were talking about. Do people culturally relate to things differently? I think so. And I think we need to integrate, and I think we're starting to see it. We need to see design that is closer to what people relate to. Again, this idea of what they are used to and what they like. And that might not be that super minimalistic green aesthetic, or that might not be that super urgent, bright neon yellow green that we've seen around that, to talk about urgency. Maybe that's
Right.
not that at all. Maybe it's messy. Maybe it's really colorful and full of, textures. I think there's a lot of that that's really important that we need to consider. Again, it's I think there shouldn't be also one brand to climate change, sustainability, and design, and neither of is design. I don't think there should be one way. I keep saying there's no one way to do design, and there's definitely
Right.
not one way to do data visualization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important because you learn that through your work. And so if we were to rethink how we're communicating climate change, we can't just say it in one universal message, apparently.
Yeah.
Culturally,
It needs to be local.
so different.
It's culturally, it's emotionally. I really think it's a personal way of, interacting with images. I mean, you see it even that you go to see a movie, you come out and it's like people saw a different movie sometimes.
Yeah.
You're like, this was so sad. And the person next to you was like, oh, I feel so good. It was so recomforting. I don't know, it's like.
Yeah. Well, I think it's even, with movies now, it's even more extreme there where people have been used to streaming, right? They're at home, they're wearing whatever they want to wear, and that's how they're enjoying something they watch. And then they're going to the movies, and I've seen people bring their blankets, their their slippers, and smuggle in food and drink, and maybe even fall asleep. So,
But why not? I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting. The context of what we present is really important. I think when we think, that's my problem personally. I think my work consists mainly on digital media, to be honest. I've had some print design for people who receive the news print. Today, I still work for this industry. I've done work for a technology review journal, for instance, but a lot of it is digital. And of course, most people see things on the digital, but I'm not sure that's the way systematically. I'm actually pretty convinced that we may be going the wrong way when we do everything digital, when we think campaign for climate change.
Interesting.
This generation, like my grandparents, who are more on TV still today, or might be more interested in receiving leaflets still. They look at the mail. So it's a bit reverse of what we're thinking of. I think we're looking at young generation, and it's very important. But maybe there's others that should also receive things differently and are completely isolated. I'm even thinking of accessibility. Not everybody can access the web. for multiple reasons, like financial reason and also just simply like visual impairment.
Yeah, no, you're totally right on that. One of the students I had this past semester was working on a program, communicating for a program called Illinois Solar for All. And it was dedicated to providing free solar on homes and condos to people making under 40,000 a year. So individuals and then families was like 50 or 60. Don't quote me on the families part. I don't remember. But what she did was she patterned her solutions after what the Affordable Care Act did when um, Obamacare, essentially, and that the people they really wanted to reach weren't really on social media. They weren't looking at digital. They were still getting television channels,
Mhm.
and so she put a lot of her energy into radio and TV ads.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's correct. And we forget sometimes. I mean, and I'm thinking specifically designer working in like big design studio, like myself, sometimes working
Yeah.
because we think digital, we think social media, we think TikTok, like we think all the stuff that we've seen increasing in the newer generation, but we forget that there's fast. And then first, there's not the entire world that has access to those platforms for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
And also, even within America, a lot of people still don't have internet. Like it's that silly, or they're not on social media because, it's just not the generation or they're just not interested. So how many people are we missing in this conversation that
Mhm.
just simply don't have access to this? Yeah, I fundamentally agree. And even the bigger layer, I'm thinking it's great. We're doing campaign to reach out to policymakers. I don't think policymakers are on social media so much either.
No. I mean,
They
you
know they
mentioned
get
earlier,
yeah.
the rural, on the fence or don't believe it, individuals. They're probably not on Instagram very much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
No.
don't. So, and it's funny because a lot of my personal work is on Instagram. That's
Yeah.
good. That's my audience. I'm actually trying to aim very much for that audience. But yeah, there's a truth to that. And I'm thinking, politics going to Washington. I can imagine they don't have time to hang out on Instagram either. They get briefed. So how do we make it easy for the people making the brief? Again, they're only reading
Mhm.
the brief. They're not even making it. So the person accessing the brief needs to have quick access to data in a way that's, super fast, super easy for them to print out, to literally hand out
Got
to
it.
their representatives.
So you really need to know your audience, right? I mean, this is one of the first rules of when you're starting a design project is know your audience. And so, yeah, I mean, I've taught so many classes where the students involved in the project want to make a difference, but their solution ends up being like another app. It's like, where
Yeah.
how do we stop this as teachers? Like, what? Yes, it's
I,
not always the case that,
I'd be interested to see how we can integrate the idea of going to ask people for opinion. We still today do things, even myself, a lot of research online, and that's very helpful.
yeah,
But even for me, I think I'm missing a lot of that part of just like talking to the people that actually either are behind the data or are going to receive the data and ask them how they receive, their mail, like how do they get information? And I
mhm,
think we may be surprised, and maybe that's how we do it. Maybe that's what instead of giving brief to students and you let them whatever, be like the first stage is you actually have to meet someone in person.
yeah, that's huge. Like being able to know the people you're talking with.
And put aside your assumptions on how they consume
Yeah,
information.
yeah, and obviously, if you're a part of that community already, like you said, that'll be a lot easier for you because you're one of the people you're trying to reach, possibly. But if it's an audience that you're not a part, or community you're not a part of, you should meet them. Have you been able to do that in your work? Been able to meet people that you're trying to reach that you don't know a lot about?
Not really, and not directly, especially COVID happened, then, we
Oh
don't
yeah,
get,
yeah.
but however, there's also a way to do it without going to like even interview people yourself, which is having proxy. So can you find representative of those people,
Mhm.
and like follow them and interact with those people that may be, there's voices too. You don't all, there's voices that represent, they're not obviously not always perfect. They don't represent all opinion in one group, but can you find those people and really immerse yourself in how they see the world, and you might see it differently. I think it's really important. I think that's the key. It sounds really hard. And you're like, wait, you have to go in a community and ask. But maybe there's a community there that's more accessible. Maybe there's a community there that's on Instagram,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned policymakers and you mentioned people in the communities. And I'm wondering, because I've heard both things here, that you say both things, that um, obviously you have to cater the data visualization and the story to each audience differently. Which audience, if there is a more important audience, do we need to reach more with this type of story? Is it the policymaker? Is it the vast amount of people in the world that really could create action?
I think I think it's whoever you want. Obviously, policymakers are at the end of the day the people that need to make changes. Like I did, but the individuals can have an impact on them by voting, by putting pressure
Right.
on. So I'm actually really convinced that we have an issue right now because most people either are focusing only on general audience, and that's an issue because it's not enough. We also need policymakers and all founders, investors. Like we need to put pressure on those
Yeah.
people too.
Everybody.
Exactly, which is why I think everybody has a space in climate, like fighting climate change. It's not everybody has to be an Instagram famous designer communicating on climate. Not everybody has to. You can have an impact in house. Like I really think so. We
Yeah.
tend to promote like those big designer making big project, and I guess somehow I'm somewhat part of it sometimes where I work with those big name. But I'm pretty convinced that sometimes being an in-house like designer for nonprofits can have way more impact on,
Mm.
on like the actual change. Or I actually think that the people making the brief for policymakers are probably the most powerful people because they
Wow.
literally decide what information goes in front of their eyes. Like they're the one filtering.
Back to words again. Maybe right back to the beginning. Maybe we need to be writing more.
We all need to be. I think everybody who does design should write. And I'm a
I agree.
terrible writer. I'm absolutely terrible. But I actually think copy is such a despise. Like it's a secondary
Sure.
element. But I actually think it's very, very important. And we should be really aware of like learning how to write and what to write for who.
I totally agree. And I've invested so much time over the past, I don't know now, 8 years, maybe more, and just trying to be a better writer. I'm actually starting to enjoy writing more than design because I don't know, there's something more powerful sometimes just about words.
Yeah, I agree. Although I'm definitely more of a speaker than a writer.
Well, you're doing a great job here today speaking, so I appreciate that. What you were just saying though, inspired me to think of a design project, and let me know what you think. Essentially, is it possible to take the same bit of data, important piece of data, and package it in a story to different audiences, policymakers, insurance, business, rural Americans, and to see how effective it is in each one of those cases, and could it create some sort of culminating force catalyst for change. Something that just came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would love to see that happen. I would I would love to see an exercise like that where we take one data set and like the exercise would be to present it to three different audiences. And like I think the
Mm,
format would be completely different. I think the data within the data set, the data you would show would be completely
right.
different. I'm actually making an exercise right now. I'm working with. Am I allowed to talk about it? I don't know. I think so. I'm working the Smithsonian Museum. By the time we release this episode,
Yeah,
it'll be
we'll put
out
this
there.
out last, right?
Yeah, I won't talk about the content, but I'm working with the Smithsonian Museum on a scientific paper they're about to publish, and they have the scientific paper with database, but they also have a communication strategy. The same content, right? Complete different audience. Like, how does that look in scientific paper? We have restricted, colors, restricted attention, restricted format because it's going to be printed and on the web. So all this stuff. And then on the other side, we have communication toward a general audience that's a bit more fluid.
Right.
So how do we present that in a way that's way more digestible, where we won't have a formatted legend? Can we tell a story? If it's on Twitter, can it be looking, but like, how do we, adapt it to mobile? So you can actually have the exact same paper, but the audience can completely transform the project. It's a great
Yeah.
exercise.
Yeah. So it sounds like if someone wanted to teach a class and use it as a project, right, you'd have to have a pretty big data set so you could narrow it down to the very niche cultural components that could reach these different audiences.
Yeah. It doesn't need to have it be a big data set though. Like you could be
Doesn't.
no, I don't. I think people tend to think big data all the time.
Yeah,
And
I
think
know. It's just like a catchphrase, right?
I'm in love with the small data. I'm like, you have 3 data points. That's enough to make a graph. There's simple data. Like, I mean, even showing, I made this simple graph of just showing carbon equivalent, production of carbon emission equivalent per country in like the last year versus like cows, I mean, meat and dairy.
Yeah.
And the meat was represented with a little cow. But anyway, it's a simple graph and probably seen it before. And it's like 5 data points, literally.
Yeah.
But it's a very efficient one. It's just like, it's as big as, so the production of carbon by, meat and dairy production is as big as like China emission in a year. It's massive. So it's very simple data. Like there's not much to know about it, but I think you can present it way differently. Like I put a cow in there. There's literally a cow, and it's 3D floating colon, which is forbidden by the database community. Usually, you don't do 3D, but I do.
You don't.
But it was it was made to be projected on the screen in a big screen in the COP26. So people like leaders of the industry and people would actually walk through, and you cannot catch people with a chart. I'm sorry, people won't look at it. Like it's not really interesting. A big cow with flapping ears, because it was animated, it might work,
Right.
So you just have to think of it like it's a really big, it's a big question of like, sometimes we also have to bend rules to make something that, is attractive or is different or catch your attention or you can relate to.
Yeah. So I think it'd be the power of small yet cute data.
Probably, I want to bet that if you put a cat anywhere, it'll work better.
Cats and puppies, they're like the number one thing on YouTube that people watch, right? It's like,
exactly. Like, can you do that? Or, I mean, there's a lot of things like TikTok, for instance, is like, it blows my mind because we all about designers, we're all about 3D design. I mean, I personally am. I love 3D design. But TikTok is all about like raw video, like people doing like having those like weird angle, bad lighting. It doesn't have to be like elevated and minimalist.
Authentic, right?
Authentic, and it works. It works because of it, because it's so authentic, because it's very personal. And I think there's something to be explored there. Not that I'm a huge fan of TikTok, but
I'm the same way because I've been thinking about TikTok based on a lot of people who've been telling me like it's a really interesting platform to try to educate people because there are a number of TikTok, I guess, influencers now that have been able to do a really good job of educating people to action, right? And I'm wondering, like, can data be used on TikTok in an engaging way? Have you tried that, or do you know a good example?
I haven't tried yet. I'm a little scared of TikTok.
Yeah, me
it's
too.
also a lot of work, and I'm like I like tiny. I mean, if my work is very
so much work,
I like my work to be really clean, and I feel like raw footage is like the opposite of what I like to do. So I'm a bit like, oh my God, I don't know. But I actually think I'm like looking at it like very closely because I think somebody needs to look at it. There's and again, it's a specific audience of younger generation Z, I think. That's how we call them now.
Yeah, Gen Z.
Yeah, Gen Z. And I think there's something to be said about that. I think people really enjoy those content and we've seen video content doing really well even outside of TikTok. I'm thinking of Vice. It's like one of those great examples. They do incredible video with like tape and it's nice. It looks really nice. It's a nice, obviously, footage, shot from above. Like but it's always like scrappy, like people writing and tape and whatnot. And that works because people can relate to that.
Yeah, that's another assignment, for the next semester for anyone listening. It's taking data and finding a way to engage the TikTok demographic, which would probably be Gen Z, into some sort of action, right? I mean, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Or like make a database with something from like your home. Like you're not allowed to use a computer. Maybe to do the first graph like on Excel or something, but you're not allowed to like do any Photoshop Illustrator. Like,
that's totally cool because it's like what's around you, what's local.
Yeah, exactly. What's local? What do you have? And that's it. Like make it, or maybe you even have a time. Like you have 2 hours. Here's your graph. Like we give you all the data.
Yeah.
And it's a simple set of like 5 data points. So you can't go into like fancy things, but How would you make it if you had to like show it to somebody? Literally, you sit in the
Yeah,
park and you have to show it to someone. How would it look like? Is it
totally.
potty? Like potty on a lake? Is it like a pottery sculpture with tape? I don't know, but
Could be a lot of things. This is all bleeding into my last question for you. This is perfect. You've found a way to do that. So thank you for that. And I'm keeping one of the same questions that I have from the first season to all my guests, and that is um, essentially, what would you do if you were in the design educator's shoes and you were asked to teach a class or a project on, as a climate designer? What would you do? What would you assign these students? Maybe it is TikTok, right?
maybe it is. I think I would, like what we were talking earlier, I think I would invite them to do something local. So we'll start with that. It needs to be local data.
Local,
Um,
perfect.
it would be local, and they would have to meet the people. I think that still be a good exercise of like meeting the
I like
people,
that.
and I and I think they would be forbidden from of having the format as anything digital. Maybe it's an image, but it needs to be there. That's going to be printed and put it somewhere.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know it feels counterintuitive because of course, and I do a lot of my work is actually making work for social media, so it
Yeah.
might be ironic, but I would be interesting to see like how would you approach data about, let's say, racial inequity, present this to a representative in Beverly Hills?
Mm.
Like how
A
would you
good
do that?
class field trip to LA.
Yeah, like I mean, I'm here, so it's easy. But that's it. That's a really great question. Like, how do
Yeah.
you convince them that they have to be more caring and careful, with police brutality and treating,
Yeah.
people going for homelessness with more respect? Like, how would you bring that up to representative? Would you send a leaflet? Would you send it by mail? Would you come and actually deliver it? Would you go through maybe the assistant? Would you
Hmm.
call them? Would you send a long email? There's many ways, but would you like print a you know, massive, I don't know, do it on like a cardboard, like riot type and just sit in front of the office? Maybe.
Yeah. More activism, right?
Maybe. I mean, there's 100,000 ways. So I would definitely keep it local and try to think impact. Like what would be the most impactful and avoid the social media campaign of like general audience. Like let's say for a
Right.
very specific person, like who is the person you're trying to talk to?
Yeah. So you'd let the student decide that, but you
Yeah,
set a parameter, right?
I would set priorities and let them decide whatever they want, and they're not allowed to do anything about personal carbon footprint. That's forbidden.
That's been overdone, right?
That's way overdone, and we're not fitting in the narratives, promoted by all the fossil fuel industry.
Well, we're running out of time here. It was actually this conversation went super fast. I had a lot of fun, Gabrielle, and I think there's some key takeaways I have from this, and that is cute, small data.
Yes. Yes,
Hyper
it's really that.
local, hyper local.
Yeah. I actually, it's a great way to end this because I think it also scary when you look at big data set, and I want
It
to encourage
does.
anybody around that bumps into a pie chart, like something silly, to actually like data should be part of design. It should be part of
Right.
reporting, and it should be made by anyone. And so it doesn't have to be big data set can be reserved for like hard data analysis,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
anybody can make a bar chart with 3 columns.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to your story in the Guardian about was it the Prime Minister of England was convinced by really ugly graphs, right? But it was local and there was a story attached to it.
Yeah,
So
I figured that
imagine,
right too.
yeah, imagine if they did a better job with the ugly graphs, how many more people we could convince to get on board with this.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, before you go, let's revisit where we can find your work, Gabrielle. Can you let us know where we can find you on social media and online?
I'm everywhere. You can type my name in Google and it'll pop up. There's not many people that have the same name, so that's easy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's the easiest. Otherwise, Instagram, gab.md, gab.md, and I'm also on Twitter, on the data. How do you call the little slash at the
The
bottom?
underscore, the underscore.
Underscore, yeah,
Okay.
data_soul. But
SOL.
yeah, SOUL.
Soul.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
soul.
so yeah, the other one was taken already. Somebody took my name.
Yeah.
Okay, call me. It's probably easier.
Data soul. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Gabrielle. It's been a pleasure having you on, and look forward to hearing more about your work as it develops.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. This podcast is written, produced, and engineered by me. Designed by Bashul Rashik and Mark O'Brien, with music by Casual Motive. Thank you for listening to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed the first half of season 2 of Climify. We're going to take a few weeks pause here, our mid-season break, to get our house in order as the semester is upon us. School has started, and there's a lot of things that I need to do for that. I also have a few guests in the second half of the season that I need to interview, edit, and prepare for you. I'm excited about them, and I do hope that you're having a great start to your semester or just a fantastic day altogether. We'll be back again in a few weeks, and I look forward to hearing from you over on our Instagram account or at the Climate Designers Network.
Thanks for listening to Climify. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. To catch all the latest on Climify, you can follow us on Instagram at Climify Podcast. Climify is part of Climate Designers. Learn more at climatedesigners.org/edu.